People are always saying things like, data is the new oil, and acting like they're sitting on a massive reservoir. I don't think that's true, though. Data isn't a commodity, really. You can't just act like a Beverly Hillbilly and cash in. You've got to put the work in. That's why we have data architects and other professionals. These are people who take the amorphous blobs of information that we gather, hopefully intentionally and legally, by the way, as part of our operations and turn them into something useful. I always say, if it's not conferring business advantage, why are we even doing it?
No, you don't.
Shut up, yes I do. Now that we've established that I'm a data aficionado, it's a good time to talk about why this is hard. For one, most of the time you're dealing with data in large volumes with large variety and with extreme velocity. Lots of different stuff that's changing all the time. If you've ever run a report and been skeptical about the results, congratulations, you're probably a member of the Volume Variety Velocity Club. There has to be a better name for that club. We'll workshop it. The architect is in a difficult position here.
What would you say you do here?
A good data architect serves as a translator as much as a technical professional.
I have people skills. I am good at dealing with people. Can't you understand it? What the hell is wrong with you people?
Taking the dreaded business requirement and turning it into a specific set of instructions for data workers using complex data models. Data architecture can be viewed as a bridge between defining strategy and its implementation. The data architect designs the bridge. Oh wait, I just realized that's why they're called architects. Is it weird that I just realized that? Makes sense. Anyway, that's if you even have someone with the title data architect on staff. Many organizations don't. This is handled side of the desk by other people who have other jobs and might lack the expertise or willingness to push this over the line. That's just a reality that we have to deal with. Not everyone needs a dedicated position, but the role certainly needs to live somewhere. Okay, you ready? I'm about to rattle off all the reasons why you want to do this. We'll start with what IT people feel if you don't. Poor data strategy means poor data quality. Ever worked somewhere where nobody knew what was true or not? Inconsistent, duplicative, missing, incomplete, unstandardized, outdated, or just plain wrong info can totally tank your business. Check out our video on ERP. That's exactly what happened to Target Canada. When this happens, you can't find what you're looking for. That's a big deal. And people who need data can't get it, even if it does exist. Finally, and maybe most critically for the CIO, there's no strategic alignment. You're just kind of doing your own thing, and when IT people suffer, well, everyone suffers. Specifically, those poor organizational conditions include inaccurate insights, ineffective decision-making, and ultimately inefficient operations. You don't need me to tell you that these are outcomes you probably want to avoid. So how do you avoid it? Funny you should ask. We have a few tips for you. First, you should recognize the importance of data architecture to any business transformations you're making or planning on making. You can facilitate your transformation with a sound data architecture when you're launching new products or models, merging, acquiring, or divesting, or even involved in technical debt remediation. Another point to keep in mind, this is about more than just technical data modeling. You should make sure that you're aligning closely with your business requirements and that your data architecture reflects a broad view of what you're trying to accomplish. If you're wondering how you can simplify this a bit, consider that changes to your data architecture are typically driven by 4 common business driver patterns: becoming more data-driven, mergers and acquisitions, new functionalities or business rules, and risk and compliance. Think about these business drivers and how they manifest themselves in your environment and relate your data architecture decisions right back to them. Of course, this isn't always easy. What works in one context might not work simply in another. Data is used differently across the layers of your organization. Organizational data architecture and the capabilities needed to optimize its use, therefore, change depending on the context we're dealing with. Architecting and managing data from source to warehousing to presentation requires different tactics for optimal use. And yes, architect can be a verb. I looked it up. Here are a couple of tactics you can use to make this as smooth as possible. First, focus on early alignment. If people disagree early on, you'll find yourself in trouble. You should objectively facilitate any debate and only finalize capability assessments when all are aligned. Second, you can't be passive. You're going to have to get down to brass tacks and prioritize. We actually had originally put heavily prioritize in the script, but I improvised, for effect. Focus heavily on the why, and once you're comfortable with that, use our roadmap to determine the how and align it with drivers. You can do it. I believe in you. Now, let's talk to our experts who, I'm told, also believe in you. I'm joined today by the aforementioned experts, Crystal Singh, who's a Principal Advisory Director in our Data and Analytics practice, and Kevin Tucker, who is a practice lead in the same practice. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So the first question I have about data architecture really concerns sort of the simplicity or lack thereof of data architecture as a concept. So to me, right, as I was preparing for this, data architecture seems a lot like having the right data in the right place, essentially arrayed for most effective use by the business. That seems easy and obvious. Why is this hard? And maybe I'll start with you, Crystal.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent question. So first of all, what you've described is really the end game. That's what we're striving towards, right? Organizations are looking to become data-driven. Our users of data want more and more access to data. They want that at their fingertips. And the implication for data architecture is ensuring that the data environment is well architected, ensuring that the data model is optimized, ensuring that your platform and your tool set is optimized and modernized in order to deliver value to your users from data.
So what does optimization mean in that context? It's like, I mean, data is just information, right? That's maybe structured in a particular way. How can some data be good and some data be bad from an architecture perspective?
Right. So data can be good or bad from the integrity of the data, but from an architecture perspective, users may have a poor data experience if the data isn't well set up to serve them. So organizations, there's no shortage of data that organizations collect, and they're collecting more and more as time progresses. Where the implication or the complication comes in, however, is that the data environment isn't well set up in terms of the containers. Think of it as a pipeline or platform through which that data has to run. If that pipeline or that platform isn't well tuned, it isn't well oiled, the end users waiting on that fuel from that pipeline, if it isn't delivered to them in a timely manner, it isn't delivered to them in the format in which it's consumable or readily consumable, it isn't comprehensive or it isn't complete.
So when I think about data architects as a role, right, and maybe Kevin, I'll ask you this question. What's the difference between a data architect and say like a data engineer or an end user who uses the data? I mean, to me, a lot of what Crystal's spoken about, there are folks other than data architects who would manage this. So what is a data architect? Does every organization need one?
Well, first of all, a lot of organizations don't have a formalized data architect role, but the job of the data architect really starts at the business side. They're translating the language from the business into the assets and services that the business requires. And they have to understand, where do I go to get that? Both the functional, the technical, the sources of data that are out there, increasingly in a broader spectrum. Now you're dealing with structured data, unstructured data, semi-structured data. You're talking about cloud versus on-premise, and at the edge. They have this real broad spectrum of information that business wants access to, but often they don't actually know what they want access to. And the job of the data architect is to take the information of what the business is requesting, translate that into the architectural spectrum of what can provide that service. And part of that modeling that Crystal mentioned is the visualization of that. And where are there gaps within your processes if you're trying to consolidate or if you're trying to centralize.
So data architect seems like the sort of job that probably doesn't exist in every organization. I don't go down to my local restaurant and they have a data architect, at least not somebody with that title. So do people often come to you, and maybe Crystal, I'll direct this question your way. Do they come to you and say, I have a problem, and you look at it and you go, that's a data architecture issue. You need a data architect. Does that ever happen?
Yeah, so realistically, just to touch on your point, not every organization is going to be fortunate enough to have a dedicated data architect. They may have folks wearing a data architecture or data architect hat, along with doing other data-related roles, for instance, database administration or data engineering, or even a data analyst, or working on BI reporting and analytics. With that said, when our members engage with us, they may describe, typically they would describe the challenge that they're facing, the issues that their users are facing, and for the most part, they may not come into our session indicating, well, or knowing that they've got a data architecture related issue. Based on what they've described, the issue could be related to many aspects of data management or any data capability, but based on what they're describing, my team of advisors would listen to that, and then we determine whether it's a data architecture related issue, whether it's a data governance related issue, whether it's a data quality related issue, whether it's on the consumption side of things. So it's really Very rare would you find folks knowing that they've got a data architecture related problem, but they experience the symptoms of suboptimal data architecture.
And so, Kevin, maybe that's a good question for you then, is what are some of those symptoms of suboptimal data architecture? So, you're the doctor, you've got your stethoscope, you're listening to the patient's beating heart, and you're saying, oh no, that's a data architecture issue.
Well, first off, the heart is beating way too slow. So you've got latency issues, which means the architecture of how you get and consume that information is suboptimal. You may be getting the wrong results. So you think they have a heart problem, but they really don't. You're just getting the wrong results. So you have a data quality problem. You have issues where the translation of what they expected to get and what was actually provisioned to them are wrong. So now you've got a requirements problem, and that's a requirements problem because the person getting the information from the business isn't a data architect, doesn't understand how to craft the solution to give them the right answers to the problem, whether that's through analytics or dashboards or data being served into an application. So the integration might be wrong. You may have integrated to the wrong service within the business. All of those are easy symptoms that there's a data architecture problem. The one that often happens right off the bat is that performance issue, whether it's latency or overall performance because you didn't scale the solution. And today, where we're operating in zettabytes, that's a massive problem. And we're on the verge of yottabytes, which is almost infinite. Those masses of information, you need data architects because you have to architect the solution to handle the waves of information in those different formats.
I don't think my MacBook Air can handle yottabytes. Might have to get a Pro if I want to do that.
Yeah, probably.
So we've established that a data architecture is an important function that every business is doing to some degree or another, many of them probably very poorly if they don't know that they're doing it. Some organizations will have a dedicated data architect, but some won't, right? There'll be people who are doing this sort of off the side of their desk, as we've talked about. So what are some of the skills that data architects have? So if I'm looking to hire a data architect or assign tasks, what should I be looking for in somebody to do this role?
Yeah, so some of the typical skill sets or capabilities you're looking for is definitely their ability to do data modeling. A data architect core to data architecture is the modeling of your data environment. You'd want them to have a good knowledge of the technology landscape. The technology landscape or the platform landscape is quite different today than it was in the past, like with every other aspect of IT. You'd want them to definitely, and this is probably the skill set that is often overlooked or glossed over, is their ability to be able to translate business requirements to data requirements and hence the road mapping for the optimization of the data architecture. There's no shortage of technology today, and we don't see that slowing down in any way. And for the most part, I think platforms have caught up in providing capabilities to make data more readily available at the fingertips of users. Where a lot of data architects, and hence you'd want to ensure that you keep your eye on this skill set or look for this capability when hiring, is to be able to ensure that this person that you're going to be bringing into the role of data architecture is able to cross boundaries or straddle both business and IT, be able to speak to or understand requirements from executive leadership. Our user landscape is changing. Everybody, for the most part, folks are becoming more and more data savvy and data centric. Everybody wants that optimal experience when accessing data. But we want our data architect to be able to be grounded in not getting overly excited about the platform side of things. Granted, that could be the exciting side, the technology and it's shiny, who wants to do requirements gathering and who wants to ensure that we speak to business executives and business stakeholders. But unfortunately, we cannot. With all the advances in technology today, that requirement or that aspect has not become obsolete. So it is, I'm probably describing a little bit of a unicorn here, but they do exist. But, I would emphasize that we certainly do not want to gloss over that skill set of being able to straddle business and IT, have uncomfortable conversations with the business, and be open to hearing sometimes, well, we missed the mark and we need to revisit and we need to probably remodel or redesign.
So obviously at Infotech, we have an approach to this, right? A methodology that we use. And I was wondering, what do most organizations get wrong? And how does our methodology address those common mistakes? And so maybe I'll start with you, Kevin, and Crystal, feel free to weigh in if you have anything to add.
I think in a lot of cases, what organizations get wrong at the onset is when they don't have a data architect, they don't actually have a structured process for architecting the environment. And in many cases, they don't even have the basic data literacy. So they don't know who the data owners are. They don't have data stewards. They don't have people within the business that can really work with the people that are playing that role of data architect. So they may be wearing the hat of data architect, but they don't actually understand what's required. And so, back to what Crystal was saying about, the data architecture role and the things that they have to do with the business, part of the challenge with that role is they have to be able to get requirements and they have to map that out. And it has to start at the data, understanding, okay, what is required by the business of that data? I don't want to just go out and ingest data. I need to know what's required of that data before I go and ingest it into a system. And so part of the challenge that you have these days is you also have new concepts or relatively new concepts like API first, where you have an environment where at the onset, they develop the APIs, the integrations, before the solution is in place. And so data architects have to be up on the technology, like she said. They have to be able to stay up to date on the technology, as well as understanding how do I communicate with the business in their language and translate that into the architecture.
Yeah, so our approach to data architecture certainly advocates for at the front end, really defining the user requirements, really understanding what the users are asking for, understanding the business drivers, understanding what's happening in the organization, being firmly tuned in to what the business strategy is or strategic plan or institutional plan, whatever, regardless of what you call it in the organization, but really understanding what are the business drivers, what's a priority, what has senior leadership said. Are we focused on driving stakeholder engagement, whether that's a customer or a student or a patient, regardless of the industry? Are we focused on driving product innovation or service innovation? Are we looking to manage operating costs or improve our operational efficiency or excellence? Are we looking to manage and mitigate risk? So at the front end, you'll find that our approach to optimizing or modernizing your data architecture and ultimately building out that roadmap, very first thing we advocate for is in defining those requirements, really firming up what the business drivers are, because that's going to steer the development of your roadmap, your plan, and ultimately this improved data architecture. So at the front end, we advocate for that. We've got our tools and our templates to support you with doing that. Then you want to move on from that understanding, we want to start building out conceptually, well, what does this solution potentially look like? And that then translates into, formulating a roadmap that's scalable, a roadmap that is feasible, and working with your stakeholders, working with your other data experts or colleagues in the organization. I am a firm advocate for things like data governance, for instance. So while our topic here today is on data architecture, we cannot ignore the fact that there are complementary disciplines in the data space that all have to come together. So part of that roadmap formulation is ensuring that we're not just, as we've been speaking, focusing primarily on the technology. That is certainly part of it, but you want to ensure that all of the other complementary disciplines, the governance of that data, the quality of that data, how well is that data going to be consumed or how consumable is it? All of that has to come together, and you put all of that together in your plan or your roadmap, which obviously consists of things like a RACE and a timeline and all that good stuff. But the approach, just to summarize, it's founded on first firming up the business drivers, the why. We're even looking to modernize our architecture. Any organization that's looking to modernize or optimize their architecture, chances are they're not a startup. They've been in existence, they've been getting by, they have been delivering their products, their services. So it begs the question, or the data architect will receive pushback as to, well, why are we looking to shake things up?
So it's about getting the foundations right so that the structure that you build on top of it doesn't collapse at the smallest sign of any sort of pressure.
Yeah, and just to summarize there, or to put it simply, we do not want to be hasty and jump in and start engaging with vendors. We hear data architecture modernization, or we think data architecture is not working for us. The first thing I would encourage that the first thing we don't do is go out and engage with vendors. There's no shortage of vendors and technology players today, but that's certainly not the first thing you do.
So buying a new tool isn't going to solve all my problems?
No, it's not going to solve all your problems. But one of the things that has changed is, for example, the exercise of the road mapping. There are now tools, more advanced tools at your fingertips to help you with that, which help you with getting your functional and your technical and non-technical requirements, doing that fit gap exercise to say, if I want to consolidate services across the business, so it creates that mind map, not just the roadmap, but also a mind map that says, here are all the sources of data, of information that are at my fingertips. Here's the ones that provide the most value for the requirements as dictated by the business and what they're trying to achieve. Those tools are now available, which previously weren't. Tools don't solve the problem. If you don't get the requirements right, it's just like any situation. If you don't have the right requirements, you're not going to have the right solution, and it is going to fall over.
So Crystal, as I understand it, this data architecture piece is part of a cinematic universe of data. So there's all sorts of different processes that you need to master at various points in your career as a manager for these processes. So where does the data architecture piece fit in?
Mm-hmm. I can describe or explain this through the lens of a data leader. So whether that data leader carries the title of chief of data or otherwise, we know every organization is unfortunate enough to have a chief of data, but they all have some form of data leadership. So from a data leader's perspective, he or she ideally would have a data strategy. And a data strategy, while I know strategy tends to conjure up thoughts of big and fluffy and are we ever going to get it done, a data strategy is very important for the whole data realm at the organization to ensure that all of these different data disciplines, including data architecture, is nicely stitched into the overall plan. So you've got your data strategy, which steers and directs what are we going to do when it comes to all things data, including data architecture, things like governance, things like ensuring we have the right operating model, ensuring that the data quality is optimal for delivery, ensuring that the data visualization, analytics, BI tools, and that capability is also well optimized. So data architecture absolutely has a home or a place as part of it's a core component of an overall data strategy. And while you might have a data leader, regardless of title, leading on the data strategy, he or she does not necessarily have to be a data architecture expert or a data architect himself or herself.
Kevin, I've heard that there are lots of new technologies out there floating around, and you've alluded to some of them in this session, and I alluded to some in the intro to this video. How is AI changing the game? How are new automation tools making things different or better for chief data officers and the people who work for them?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with AI is complementary to the work that people within the data realm are operating. So if you think about data architecture, and I mean, if you think about a simple scenario like a car has wiring throughout the car, and without that wiring or without the right information going through that wiring, the car is going to be all over the place. It's going to be broken. The data architect is responsible for all of the flow of data and the right data and information to make decisions in the organization. And some of the tools are on the data architect side, so the operations side, like the AI ops side that you see in IT, which is the internal aspects. And some of that is on the external aspects, which is for the consumers of that information. So if you think about a manufacturing operation, AI might be in your demand planning. So instead of just looking at orders and timing of orders, it also looks at your inventory, your stock, your dead stock, all of these different types of things, incorporates that all into the model to provide the right information to, say, the plant manager that has to make decisions with that. Whether you're in the plant or you're in HR and you need to make decisions, the data architect is architecting the whole platform that lives on across the entire organization. So they have to understand how those tools operate and how they integrate. They may not be the one using the tools necessarily, but they have to make sure they fit into the overall architecture. And AI is playing a big role because you have to actually have people that understand how to validate the results of the information that you're getting. So what are the algorithms that are being used, or the outputs? The business has to, but the architecture side also has to, because they have to make sure the right data is going into those services and it's being used in the right way. Validation. There's also the quality tools that are there as complementary for them to validate information, whether they're using synthetic data or they're using live data, helping them with data quality, helping them with cleansing, and those kinds of things. So there's a lot of opportunities for AI to work collaboratively with them.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Crystal and Kevin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us.
If you enjoyed that, please check us out online at infotech.com, where we've got the full blueprint and all sorts of other great research and advisory material.